Hello and a very warm welcome to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. My name's Conrad and I'm just talking to you from the BFI, the British Film Institute, where I'm here with my guest, my very special guest, who's actually the host, Jason Miller. Hello Jason, welcome to London.
Well, hi everybody, it's great to be here. This is my third time in London, but the first time that I've been here since before the pandemic. Last time I was here, summer of 2019, I was not yet into podcasting. I hadn't met you yet.
No. Wow, it was a different world. So tell us, what has brought you over here to London?
Heathers the Musical.
Heathers the Musical. Now, I remember Heathers from back in the day. It was a classic. I saw it at the cinema at the time. Are you a big Heathers musical fan? You just thought, I have to come and see this?
Callie, who's been on the show, discovered Heathers the Musical in junior high school through her musical theater class, quickly memorized the soundtrack.
Wow.
Asked to see the movie. I showed her the movie. The movie is much, much darker than the show, which is a little more sanitized and PG-13 and with a happier ending. But she loved it, and earlier this year, between the movie and the YouTube bootleg of the 2014 off-Broadway performance in New York, plus the pro shot of the off-West End version from a couple of years ago on Roku, she watched Heathers 9 times in 9 days, which you can do when you're a teenager. And then we learned that Heathers was coming back to the West End for a limited 6-week engagement before going on a national tour of the British Isles. And she's like, I want to see that for my birthday. And we have enough points accumulated for basically what amounted to free tickets to London.
Woohoo!
So we took a long weekend from work. Her school just ended. She graduated junior high. And we were all here in London. When we saw Heathers the Musical at Soho Theatre last night, it is incredible.
Wow.
Sitting there in the 5th row, the actors were right on top of you. She was vibrating with glee.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely loved it. It's a really great show, and it's closing in the UK next week, but it'll be on tour through November. So
okay,
if it
so
comes
we
to
can
your
catch...
area, go see it.
Okay, Heathers the Musical, I'll look out for it in case it comes to Oxford. That sounds good.
Not something that often overlaps with the Doctor Who podcast, but I am here on non-Doctor Who related business. But since I am here, I threw it out to my UK podcasting gang, and Conrad volunteered to meet me, and here we are.
Absolutely, and unbeknownst to us, it's also London Pride. So you may well go into London Pride, and I bet you the Venn diagram between musical theatre and Doctor Who and London Pride, I bet you any money you'd find there's several people in that overlap.
There was a lot of Pride branding at the theatre last night.
Right, yeah.
The marquee, the posters.
Yeah. But we've come to, it's not too bad, it's sort of mainly in the West End, but there is a little spilling over to the South Bank, so it's quite lively outside, it's quite nice. But we are not recording in the Space Corridor, but I have shown Jason the legendary Space Corridor where we record most of the Trap 1 field reports, if you ever listen to those for a Trap 1 screening. But we found a nice little quiet spot here, and this is your first time at the BFI, is it?
First time at the BFI, and I understand that I'm missing all their Doctor Who screenings because I'll be here twice in 2024, but I'll just be missing Doctor Who events each time that I'm here. Yeah,
I believe the next one is due to be end of August, but I don't know if NFT is going to be ready, so we shall see. So yeah, you won't miss it, but another time. NFT being National Film Theatre, I'm not a crypto bro, it's fine. So you're doing Space Museum today?
We are up to the Space Museum, That is correct. I've got a great guest, executive producer of Doctor Who literature, David Barsky.
The Barsky.
Barsky himself,
wow.
He is my guest. We are going to talk about the book, we're going to talk about the TV episodes, and Barsky is unstoppable. We're going to talk about a lot of other things.
Who knows where that's going to go. It's funny, I was trying to explain to my partner last night because I was watching the Celestial Toymaker Blu-ray that we've got coming out. Listen out for the Jason and I and several others on the Trap 1 podcast.
That's right.
Of that.
Trap1.podbean.com.
Thank you very much. Good publicity, sir. But I was trying to explain to my partner who Vicky was because I was playing him the extras where there's an escape room with Maureen O'Brien in it, and we were just really talking about just how lovely it is to have her really return, because obviously for years she became a writer, and like a lot of people moved away from Doctor Who and said, you know what, that's in the past, it's all a bit embarrassing, I don't want to talk about it. I've been there, I know how that feels, but she's come back to it, and it's really wonderful having her back. And I was just trying to describe, and when in trying to sum up Vicky, I sort of had to quote the Space Museum about when she, breaks into the armory and causes a revolution, and she's still got some of that spirit. She nearly caused a revolution in that escape room extra, to be honest.
That was a very, very difficult, and actually I talk about it with Barsky during the interview to come, but that is a difficult escape room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maureen O'Brien is now hearing impaired, and Peter Purvisson is in his mid-80s. And even with hints from K9 and Emily Cook watching outside, giggling at their mistakes, I am not confident that I would have solved it. And I'm a bigger Doctor Who fan than either Peter Purvis or Maureen O'Brien.
Yeah, I think that was incredibly difficult.
And it was long. It was 80 minutes.
Yeah. And now, do you like a bit of Space Museum? Because I think when I first watched it, I thought... there's no real monsters in it, because I'm in Doctor Who for the monsters, and I was like, it's a bit poor. But actually, as I've grown up, I actually enjoy it more and more as I go. I really appreciate, I like the revolution thing. I think that horrible inevitability of seeing themselves as museum pieces is such a great idea in a time travel show, to go, what happens if, oh my god, there's a chilling vision of our future. So I've actually got more fond of it. Where does it sort of sit with you? Because it's not known as it's not beloved necessarily, but I don't know, I just feel like with a bit more Vicky coming back and just reappraising this old stuff, I think I'm very fond of Space Museum now. I think of it positively. How about you?
The last DWM top to bottom survey in 2014 had Space Museum in the bottom 11. Okay. I don't understand why it's ranked so low.
No.
Okay, there are issues with it, okay? Some of the acting in the guest cast is not the best. Anytime the Doctor has to be written out for a week, it sort of leaves a big depression in the script where the Doctor should be. That noticeably harms Evil of the Daleks and Wheel in Space. Doesn't harm Space Museum to quite the same extent, because you still have William Russell, rest in peace, anchoring the show when he's not there. And also you have Dennis Spooner took some of the humor out of the script, and the humor puts the episodes in context. It is making fun of the end of the British Empire. And some of that is lost. In the audio essay after Barsky's interview, I'm going to break down both scripts, which are available on the Blu-ray. I'm going to walk you through the rehearsal script, which I assume is written by Glyn Jones. And I'm going to walk you through the camera script, which I assume is written by Dennis Spooner and or Mervyn Pinfield.
Amazing.
You'll see what changed. Not as much as you might think, but there are some key lines that were taken out and some key things that were put in which changed the texture of the story. The novelization is Glyn Jones, number one, going back and putting back lines that were taken out. And number two, complicating the plot by adding new characters and new wrinkles that were not in any of the original scripts that I can see. So there are some vast improvements made for the book, and I'm also going to take Glyn Jones's prose to task, spoiler alert, because as far as prose goes, he is no Ernest Hemingway, he is no Terence Dicks.
Okay. Oh, it's going to be an interesting one. I'm looking forward to listening to this.
And I'm also going to be talking quite a bit about the music of Elvis Costello, because this is my show, and we're also talking about Heathers the Musical.
Yeah, it's got quite a musical theme to it, this episode.
I cannot play any songs from Heathers for copyright reasons.
Can you do some renditions? Maybe get Callie on to do some... Because I hear she's quite good at the musicals now.
She is, but the high note in Dead Girl Walking Reprise is one note above her maximum range. So I'm not going to ask her to try it.
Okay, but we will explore it. You'll be fully exploring the Space Museums with the highs and lows, and I'm sure I'll be back on for. I know I've got a couple in the future. I think I've got a very exciting book, an unusual book in the future of the Doctor Who Literature podcast. But
you will be back, I think, twice more than I can confirm before the podcast reaches its natural end with book 156.
Wow.
And I may extend the show by a little bit. And have some favorite guests back on.
Yeah, nice.
Then I'm afraid you fall into that category.
Oh no, I thought this was it. But they keep reeling me back in.
It is phenomenal meeting you in person.
This is so nice.
When you're in a podcast, sitting on your computer, everybody is the same height, and I was not prepared for how tall you are.
Wow.
So
I don't know what to say about that. I've got nothing to say.
Yeah, and also I'm shorter than the average bear.
Well, that's the nice thing. Podcasting is a great equalizer. We're here. We're talking to these lovely people right now. We're all present in here together. And I think because obviously you're part of one of the co-hosts on the Track One podcast. I think I've only got one more person to meet on that podcast, and as I said to you, I've got the whole set. Not that I treat my friends like collectible action figures, you understand. But yeah, it's just lovely to meet you and do a bit of live Doctor Who literature introing. into the Space Museum.
I've met Mark twice. I've met Mark in New York, and I met Mark in Los Angeles for Gallifrey 1. So you are my second, not counting Trap One guests. I've met more Trap One guests, but you are the second Trap One co-host that I've met.
Excellent. Well, you're back next month, aren't you, to the UK?
I am back in mid to late August, another family trip. Callie will be here as well.
Excellent.
But London is like a second city for me because it is so much like New York.
Yeah.
The underground I can navigate blindfolded.
Right. Is that having watched The Web of Fear quite a few times as a kid?
When I see Goodge Street, I'm like, I want to visit the Goodge Street Fortress. Oh, Holborn. I know where Holborn is.
Excellent. Right, we're going off down the tubes to go Yeti hunting. But thank you for having me on live, and enjoy the Space Museum.
Yes, so coming up after the break, David Barsky, the executive producer, will be joining me for a no-holds-barred interview. Some salty language may be used, but it is a great episode. Having Barsky on is always a blast. And you're really going to enjoy my audio essay, which covers the Space Museum and the music of Elvis Costello in equal measure. We'll be back right after this word from Dudley Simpson.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody, and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who Podcast Network. My name is Jason, and I am joined this week by the executive producer of Doctor Who Literature, a rare honor indeed, Mr. David Barsky. David, welcome back, my friend.
Well, thank you. I've done absolutely nothing for your podcast in several weeks, so I am fulfilling my role.
We were at Galley, and you suggested that I promote you from producer to executive producer for a very specific reason. What reason is that?
Because executive producers usually don't do anything, and producers do all the work. And, you know, Mr. Sangster obviously has been doing most of the work, so I do not deserve to be on his level.
None of us are on Jim Sangster's level. But you also get your name first in the credits because you've been on the show longer, even though EPs usually get last credit.
Yeah, look, man, we take what we can get nowadays, man. Oof, TV business is, you know, need I say.
It is brutal. I am, of course, part of a TV family myself, and now that Doctor Who has dwindled down to 8 episodes a year on a pay-to-play platform, I guess we can also say that Doctor Who is feeling the media crunch.
Oh, yeah, in a lot of ways, apparently, given the ratings I've seen.
So on a scale of 1 to I'm not paying attention, are you enjoying the new season?
I'm enjoying listening to YouTubers rag on it, but other than that, I haven't watched.
Are you aware of any of the spoilers as to, for example, last week's episode?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, God. Man, I'm glad I wasn't watching live, or else I probably would have broke my television.
You know, watching in the moment, I was very, very happy to see Spoiler Deleted make a return appearance for the first time in Spoiler Deleted number of years. But then it occurred to me that an episode is not great merely because it is a sequel, and an episode is not great merely because it has a shock reveal in the last 90 seconds, no matter how vividly directed. Thing that makes the original Spoiler Deleted story great is because of the writing and acting and performances, whereas last week's episode, I'm not sure it passes all the same bars that makes the original story so great.
The way that the Spoiler Deleted villain was revealed was about as ham-fisted as you can get. I mean... You can see that this has been done so many times, and dare I say, the same device probably better in the classic series for a particular recurring villain. But anyway, no, I just can't believe the level of writing that quote unquote that's been on this current series. I mean, it's down a level. Seriously, if I may, I mean that episode Rogue, if that is not the definition of Tumblr fanfic, I don't know what is.
I will defend Rogue because Tony Award winning Jonathan
right
Groff.
now.
when Dan Quayle decided to make Murphy Brown a political talking point, and Murphy Brown devoted a 2-part episode to taking apart Dan Quayle, Saturday Night Live did a sketch called Mr. Casual Sex, which made fun of Murphy Brown lampooning Dan Quayle. And for me, Rogue was a little bit like the Mr. Casual Sex of SNL, making fun of something else, making fun of something else. It was very much characters standing around saying, what about this? What about that? Rather than just going out and telling a story. So, yes, I can see the criticism of Rogue on that level. I just happen to enjoy what they were doing as they were doing it. Even if, for me, the classic series is about poorly realized monsters being taken very seriously. The new series is about very well-realized monsters being taken as a joke. So I prefer the classic style of storytelling.
I do believe I would too. I do. I can't. It all comes down to writing, and that's why I'll always go back to the classic series. I've said this for since the new series debuted. I will watch the worst, what is some people consider the worst episodes of the classic series before I watch any of what is considered the best of the new series. That's just how I grew up. It's the way. If I discovered this show during the new series, I probably wouldn't be watching, quite honestly.
Which is speaking of ham-handed segues.
You know what? Don't tell me, because it might have been the one I was about to make myself.
When DWM did their big top-to-bottom ranking of the entire first 50 years of Doctor Who altogether, today's episode, The Space Museum, came in 11th from the bottom. I think that's at least 75 spaces too low, and I don't know where it ranked in the redone survey that DWM did last year, but I will say this. It has just become a trope that anytime a villain goes away and then comes back, they always describe themselves, or I should say, they always disguise themselves, to use the correct word. They always disguise themselves either as an anagram or as a word deletion puzzle. And Sue, Triad, Tech.
Wait a minute, hold on a second. What happened to spoilers deleted? Do you not care anymore about spoilers?
Well, if you are listening to this show, and my audience ranges from the low triple digits to the slightly higher triple digits, you already know. Plus, you would have to do a word deletion puzzle for that spoiler to be a spoiler.
All right, go for it then, man. I exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying about the reveal. But you can spell it out if you want to. I'll just close my eyes and block my ears.
Let's just say, for example, that 5 years from now, RTD, who is in its 6th season, and it's on Disney Channel, and Ncuti Gatwa is in his final 8 episodes of the show. And they're at an archaeology site in Egypt, and they come across this big silvery sphere in the desert. And UNIT is there, and everybody who was a member of UNIT at that point. Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, Melanie Bush, Rose Temple Noble, Peter Purvis comes back 6 years from now to be a regular on the new series. Caroline Ford comes back on the new series. Amy Pond comes back. Everybody now who's ever been on Doctor Who is a member of UNIT. Professor Travers is reincarnated and has made a member of UNIT. They're all in the desert, and they're all standing around the sphere. Then they open up the sphere, and this figure comes out, and he says, "My name is Kroom." Yes, that'll do. And it takes people 3 more weeks to get to the season finale, and it turns out that Kroom is really a Morok in disguise. That's how the Space Museum would be sequelized in the new series. It would be an anagram, like Mr. Saxon, which is an anagram for Master Number 6. I mean, there are ways to bring back classic and great villains that don't involve them disguising themselves with a comedy mustache and an anagram.
Well, one of the most egregious things about the writing in this past episode was they called it an anagram, but it wasn't. It was a portmanteau. And that is just absolutely ridiculous.
See, this is why you are on the show. You are a fountain of straight talk, and I don't always agree with everything you're saying. I'm not hating this new season quite so much. But the way you say it, I am automatically convinced that nobody has been more correct than you are. You have the confidence. You have the brio.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the Boston Confidence. I think I've told you about that, haven't I?
Yes. I am familiar with people from Boston and their confidence. Congratulations, by the way, on the Celtics raising the banner for the first time in quite a long time. And you are wearing a Larry Bird doing the Leonardo da Vinci pose with the 6 arms and the 6 legs.
The Vitruvian Man, as it's
The
called.
Vitruvian Man, yes.
Yes.
That was the word I was looking for.
I mean, I was just going back. I'm not really a basketball fan anymore, but I grew up watching that era of Bird and Johnson, Magic Johnson, and I pretty much stopped watching since. Probably coincided with going to college when they were leaving the game anyway. But yeah, I still root for the town. I still root for the home city. I want them, to be happy. And yeah, it's all right. I saw the best meme today. I think it was on Instagram. The Celtics won in 2024, which is this year. They last won in 2008, 8 and 24, which were Kobe Bryant's numbers. I think that's great. There's a picture of him there, all mad. When he was alive, of course.
Well, you being now a Los Angelino, and that's where Kobe lost his life.
Yeah, not very far from where I'm sitting right now, actually.
Oh my goodness.
Anyways, we don't have to go that deep, but yeah, I've passed by the crash site on my driving by quite often.
I was raised a Yankees fan. One of my earliest childhood memories, one of my earliest baseball memories is the death of Thurman Munson coming over the news.
Yep.
I knew somebody who lived in the building where former Yankee pitcher Corey Lytle died when he crashed his training plane into a high-rise building in Manhattan right before the 2006 playoffs. And more importantly, speaking of crashing and burning, the Mets are in the middle of a winning streak now, which has to do with Grimace from the McDonaldland characters throwing out the first pitch. But they're still a dreadful team, and they have not had much to celebrate in a very long time. Anybody who heard my October 1986 episode talking about the story of the 1986 Mets knows that's pretty much the last great Met highlight month.
Ooh, all I remember from that series was from that World Series was Darryl.
This is where taunting a player comes back to bite you because Darryl hit the home run that iced Game 7. I'm sure you don't need reminding of that.
I know. It was, again, that Boston confidence sometimes turns to hubris.
Well, Darryl's from Los Angeles. You're in Los Angeles. You and Darryl should be very simpatico right now.
I only live here. I don't exist here. I try to keep a more worldly view, if you will.
Well, in the first 11 minutes, we've managed to alienate most of my core audience by talking incessantly about sports and by not being fawningly praiseful of the new series. Again, there's a defense to be made of the new series. I enjoyed the reveal in the moment, and I'm very curious as to see if part 2 can stick the landing. But I'm also doing a Trap 1 Tomorrow recording on the story, which is what last week's episode was a sequel to. So I'll be saying very nice things about that original story from Spoiler Deleted Year.
Okay.
That's still my jam. Let's talk then about Space Museum. Misunderstood story, underrated story. I can't imagine why it ranks as low as it does. Let's explore this. The Hartnell era is the best era of the show. And I say this because every other era of the show except for the McCoy era, has a rigidly defined formula. Troughton era, base under siege. Pertwee, unit alien invasion or mad scientist. Tom Baker is either gothic horror or Tom Baker smirking at the camera while Graham Williams is losing control up in the producer's booth. The JNT era is a hermetically sealed beast all unto itself. The Hartnell era does anything, anywhere, anywhen, in any order. There's no formula yet. It does whatever it wants in any fashion. The Space Museum the first episode is Twilight Zone, and the last 3 episodes are a comic look at the demise of the British Empire. But because the production team took out the humor from the submitted scripts, that point doesn't quite get across. I think Space Museum is great. I like what Rob Shearman says on the DVD, though. There's 3 things wrong with Space Museum. Episodes 2, 3, and 4. That's a true reflection of the criticism of the story, but I don't think those 3 episodes are actually bad in and of themselves.
I 100% agree. I mean, I never hated the story at all. I've never really actively disliked it. But, to me, and ironically enough, it was directed by the same individual. It's sort of like the setup of the first episode doesn't it is never lived up to in the subsequent episodes. It's the same thing that the Sensorites is the problem with the Sensorites. The cliffhangers and the problem within both are just amazing. They're so atmospheric. The episodes, the one for each of those, I love both of them. But then they sort of become a runaround, especially the Sensorites, which again I don't dislike. I do enjoy that story. But you're right about the humor about the fall of the British Empire or whatever. There's still pieces of that in there, but not enough to really hit it home and make people understand what they're truly trying to get at there.
I am recording my Sensorites episode about 10 days after this one. I am a Sensorites fanboy. Who is the most realistic depiction of an alien in season 1? Is it the robots that are Daleks aren't robots, but the Daleks are a thinly veiled parody of the Nazis? The Sensorites are philosophical aliens who are scared of the dark. I like the Sensorites, and they can be criticized for the way they are portrayed. Again, see what I mean about an alien race poorly realized but taken very seriously in universe, which is the opposite of how the new series does it, except that the Ood are the Sensorites for the new series, and the Ood are actually portrayed non-comedically, so I like that.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the Ood, they sort of elevated them, obviously, in the later stories as far as their importance to the universe and to the Doctor Who universe, if you will. But the Sensorites, I don't know. They're do timid old men make for a good show? I don't know. We don't want to digress here too much, but I think that was probably one of the main criticisms, and still is, of that. You're right. It's like, why are they so afraid of the dark if they're so smart? I mean, it's not just portrayal, it's writing. It's sort of awkward writing. But again, I listen to these podcasts sometimes, and I'm sometimes like, it's just a kid's show. These are overanalyzing the writing, and let it be fun and let it be a teaching lesson. If there is anything to be done so within these, and let's just remember that that's who they're writing for. So we're sitting here, God, 70 years almost now out, if you will. I guess we just had the 60th, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But whatever. There's been too much talk like that, and I think look, we just have to enjoy these, and that's why I think the funny thing is I'm the opposite way. The more I analyze these things from a quote unquote academic level, like I look at the writing or I look at the direction, I enjoy them more. I find more interesting things. I'm looking at it from different ways, and I think more people ought to do that instead of say, oh, okay, this is a black and white episode. It was pretty creepy in the first episode, going back to this, either one, the Space Museum or the Sensorites, and then we just got a bunch of running around in quarters after that.
And this is a show that is partially hamstrung because William Hartnell was on vacation in episode 3 out of 4. So what should be the episode building up to the climax, all the pieces falling into place, he's not in it. Not because the script said, we're going to do an avant-garde episode of Doctor Who without Doctor Who. He was contractually obligated to be off that week, and they had to work around him and write around him. That being said, in episode 2, Hartnell has... and we're talking about Space Museum now, not Sensorites. Hartnell has possibly the two funniest moments of his entire run on the show in episode 2 alone. And I'm sure you can guess which 2 segments they are, which 2 sequences.
Well, obviously, when he gets away from Daco, it was Daco, right? I keep getting those guys. And they changed names in the book, of course. Of course. When he hides in the Dalek. Obviously, and that was brilliant, and it was such a kitsch moment, but man, it is fun. And he's mainly a comedic actor outside of Doctor Who, and he's brilliant at comedy. Every time he does it, he's just so jovial, and you love to hear this, like, sort of this guy who's sort of a curmudgeon a lot of times and overbearing and all knowledgeable to have fun like that. It's really fun. The other sequence, episode 2, funny sequence. Boy, I don't know what you're referring to actually off the top of my head.
So coming back to the Dalek sequence, not only is it funny that he's hiding out inside the Dalek prop, when he emerges from it, he starts laughing so long and so hard at his own cleverness that he's immediately captured by the Morlocks.
Yeah.
Or I should say Mr. Kroom. So that's the icing on the cake. The second sequence is when he is kidnapped by the museum director.
Oh, right.
And he's being interrogated.
Of course. I love that sequence. Yeah, and he's putting the seals up there and then and the penny farthing.
And the Hartnell and the Edwardian striped one-piece bathing suit, which is both a disturbing image, but is very bold on the choice of the actor.
Yeah, you got to think. I mean, now that we have updated, DVD resolution and and Blu-ray resolution, you probably wouldn't even be able to make out what that was on the TV screen back in '65.
Ncuti Gatwa is the most physically fit actor to ever play Doctor Who. The only person who would come close is Matt Smith, who was a trained athlete, but because Matt Smith was hidden in tweed, you never really noticed, unless you're paying attention, how physically fit he is. Like when he hoists himself out of the TARDIS in his very 11th hour, just only using his arms. That's a guy who's incredibly buff. You just can't see it because he's dressed as the old man in the young man's body. Ncuti Gatwa has a costume designer who is living up to Ncuti Gatwa's physique. William Hartnell was not nearly as physically fit. Hartnell was the same age that Brad Pitt was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but there's night and day as to which of those guys is in better shape.
Well, yeah. It's shocking. I mean, you look at when Hartnell left, he was the same age as when Capaldi started.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Ow! Well, for those of you in real time, the two cats were on the table at the same time, and they realized that they hated each other, so they barreled into my pile of Target books that I have for this podcast, and my cell phone, and my chest, which now has claw marks up and down. Whew, that was fun. All right, that's a real-time Doctor Who literature. No editing involved. The cats decided to attack the podcast.
Well, luckily, you are in the kitchen, and there's a pot and fire nearby.
I am in the dining room, and I will point out that the lights on the hood over the stove resemble Cro-Agnon from Paradise Towers, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. They certainly do.
So I'm just cleaning up after myself. I have Space Museum out because that's today's episode. I have Faceless Ones out because I'm reading that, and that is the episode I'm recording Saturday. Plus, I have the second Doctor Who quiz book. You up for a game, my friend?
Absolutely. I used to own that.
See, Jim Sangster just pulled out his copy and was playing along with me, and I quickly realized that, whoops, you're cheating, Mr. Sangster. But for you, we're going to go to page 12, The Adventures of the First Doctor. Are you ready to play?
Absolutely.
Going to read the first 5 questions on the board. 3 answers out of 5 correct is a winning score. 5 out of 5 is a perfect score, and you will win the people's ovation and fame forever.
That's all I desire, really.
See, the first one is a bit of a cheat, but I'm going to do it anyway because we go in order here. Question 1. On what planet was the Space Museum to be found?
That would be Zeros.
That is absolutely correct. Or when I was a kid, I thought it was Xerox after the brand of photocopiers. In the Ark, we were witness to the final destruction of the Earth as it plummeted into the sun. Now that is the way it is literally typed on the page. What it means to say is a witness to the final destruction of the Earth as it plummeted into the sun. The question is, when did this take place?
Oh, gosh. Oh, God. It was a long time ago. Or a long time future.
A long time from now, you should say.
Yeah, a long time from, yeah. It wasn't the Doctor Who's favorite era, the 51st century, right? It wasn't that far ahead, was it? It was something like that, wasn't it?
51st century is very soon. The Ark is much, much further than that. If we think of time as made into segments, and if we're sitting in the first segment of time.
Wasn't it like the 6th segment of time or something like that?
You're thinking of Princess Astra in the Armageddon Factor.
No. There was something where it took place in a certain segment of time. I know it was.
Go to the refrigerator, Look for a bottle of Heinz. Get your ketchup out. Somewhere on that bottle is a clue.
It took place on the 6th ounce.
On the Red Sox, what was Tim Wakefield's number when he was a Red Sox hurler?
Oh God, I don't even remember.
No, that's right. He was 51.
37th. No, he's 51. Was he?
I think he was 51.
I already mentioned that number.
57. At least 57 segment of time.
All right, so it was a segment of time.
Yeah, but Heinz 57. That was the clue.
Oh, I got you. Yeah,
Maybe I should have made it as an anagram. What's an anagram at 57?
Well, I'd have to. There's too many letters. Figure that.
Question 3. And you're 1 for 2 so far. The Zarbi were originally a placid and mindless species living in coexistence with the Monoptera. What had changed them into the deadly creatures encountered by the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Vicky?
Oh man, it was the man. I totally forgot the name of the intelligence there. You know what I'm talking about?
It's a dictionary word.
Yes.
And it means an evil intent or anger or grudge, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. Ah, damn it, my brain. Not the malice.
If it were to come back to season 4 of Disney Who in the year 2027, and everyone is standing at that comically large, overcompensating unit tower, and they're looking at the screen, and the word Sumina, S-U-M-I-N-A, appears on screen, and somebody goes, "Oh my God, it's an anagram! It's an anagram for."
Oh God, it begins with an M, right?
No, it does not.
No, Jesus. What is it? I'm gonna kill myself.
One last chance.
Okay.
If the anagram began with the letter M, it would be Munias, M-U-N-I-A-S.
If it began with the animus.
Yes!
Of course.
You got it. The animus.
She just gave it me in Pig Latin. I knew it was something like that. It's terrible. Man, that's terrible. I haven't seen that in a long time. But I'm getting old.
You're younger than Hartnell, younger than Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, younger than Capaldi. You're giving me sad face emojis. All right, the next 2 you better get right. Question 4. Nobody's failed this game yet. Of course, Bill Evenson hasn't played it yet. Hi, Bill.
Yeah.
Question 4. What was the planet of giants?
Well, it was Earth.
Yes, there you go. That's literally the answer in the book.
Yeah, well, isn't that the answer?
That's the answer. You got 2 right, you got 2 wrong. The last one is the tiebreaker. Oh, you're not getting this one in a million billion years. Question 5. How long had the pilot of Flight Red 50 been imprisoned by the mechanoids? That's a tough question because that's like a cryptic clue.
All right, yeah. So, how long had Stephen been in prison?
Yes. How long had Stephen been in prison? I would have gotten this wrong.
They don't even mention him, do they? They don't even mention Stephen in there.
In the answer, it does in parentheticals. Parentheticals. The pilot of Flight Red 50 was Stephen.
Oh, okay.
But I'm
how
looking
long
for
he had been in there?
A whole number that expresses a period of years.
Yeah. I want to say 7 years, but that's probably wrong.
That's definitely wrong.
What is it?
This is guess a number. Pick any whole number between 1 and.
I said 4 was my second guess.
That was I thought it was 4 also. Maybe I'm getting that from the novelization. The answer is in fact 2 years.
2. All right. Well, that was enough, I guess.
If I do any post-production on this episode, I will insert the Price is Right failure horns here.
Boom, 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 boom. I can do it myself, man.
Ever gone to a live taping of The Price is Right?
Yes, I have. Long time ago.
Were you picked to be an audience member? Were you picked from the audience to be a contestant?
No, but it was really interesting as we're waiting out. Yeah, have you been yourself?
So we lived in LA for almost 2 years, as you're aware. This was long before I met you, and we actually got tickets for taping. And then Leslie woke up sick on the morning of taping, and we didn't leave the house the whole day. So we had to leave our tickets unclaimed. It was the one time we had a chance to go, and illness scuttled that.
Well, I went with a bunch of friends from work, and at that point I was working. It was my first job in Hollywood. I was a parking attendant at Universal Studios, and we decided to go down. I had only been in town maybe 5 months at that point, And but you wait in line outside, and then the producers come out and they give you like a 2-second interview. See what kind of energy you have or what. But someone else had been and they knew they had done that. And while we were waiting though, before they came out, we're looking at everybody else in line, and we picked out at least 5 of the people who were called up. The blue-eyed blonde Midwestern girl. We knew what the type was because we'd seen the game enough, on TV.
The co-ed in the college sweater. Anybody in a military uniform. The old lady with the tight white curls. The very old lady. Yep.
That was pretty much it.
And the big guy with the bulging arms who could spin the showcase showdown wheel really, really fast.
No, they didn't pick me.
So, parking attendant at Universal, is that before or after you tiled DeForest Kelley's floor?
It's probably somewhere in that period for sure, because I only lived with the guy I did that with for 9 months, and it was my first 9 months out, so it was somewhere at that same period, So I can't remember if it was before or after those 2 events singularly.
Anybody who has not purchased the very first Outside In Star Trek volume on the TOS, the original series, Outside In Boldly Goes, your essay, I forget which story you were writing about because you pretty much ignored the story. Your essay was about your weekend tiling DeForest Kelley's house and meeting his pet turtles. It's a great essay. Got to read that. Got to buy that book. Got to read it if you haven't already.
Yeah, it was actually like I didn't even do that part of it. I just needed one thing because they couldn't afford me on that job. But I was living with a guy who worked at Tile City, and I'd sometimes do some tiling jobs with him, and he literally said, "You'll never believe whose house who walked into the store today and wanted new linoleum in his kitchen." And I said, "I don't know who, Axl Rose?" And he's like, "No." He said DeForest Kelley. I was like, "Oh my God, I will do that job for free, just to meet him." And it was great. But the problem is he looked under the house. He went over to DeForest's house because he lived right there in Encino, very close to the shop. And what they saw was after the '94 earthquake, a duct underneath that was where the moisture was coming out of his where the moisture exited from his drying machine had broken, and thus moisture was making a big black scar, a typical moisture mold scar in his kitchen that was directly underneath his kitchen. So I had to crawl under his house and duct it up, but take duct tape and actually use duct tape to tape up a duct.
That's one of the few times that duct tape is actually used for the literal reason on the label.
Yep. I was marveling at that fact that while I was under his house, in fact, I was like, this will probably be the first and only time, and so far it has been, that I've used it for its actual purpose, its namesake purpose anyway.
All right, back to the show. We've talked about Hartnell. We talked about he is very funny in the Dalek scene. He is incredibly funny in the governor interrogation scene. I discovered the Hartnell years. They started airing on PBS right around my 12th birthday, so late 1985. And there were 17 serials. Took 17 weeks to get through. Except the last weekend of the month, New Jersey Network would air a season 22 Colin Baker story. So one in October, one in November, etc. So 3 weeks out of the month, you're getting a Hartnell or a Troughton. So it's probably early 1986 when they get to the Space Museum. I was almost 12 and a half. I was laughing myself silly with that scene. And I was taping all the episodes on VHS. I only taped the Hartnell episodes, and then I didn't start taping the rest of the series until 1990. But I would watch Space Museum over and over again because I was the weird 12/13-year-old who thought that black and white television was gripping. And I would never stop laughing, busting my gut laughing at that scene. The thing is, even though it's low budget and black and white, the care they took in making those stories, the care they take in the direction. Mervyn Pinfield is the old man of the production team. He's very close to reaching the end of his life, but they gave him the highly technical episodes. And the way he directs the episode 1 cliffhanger, which is done so fast, you would think it's post-production editing. That was all done live in the studio with the Vision Mixer. maybe not the best director out of the Hartnell years. You have a lot of young guys like, your Michael Fergusons and your Michael Imesons and your Dougie Campfields, very young guys breaking the rules. Mervyn Pinfield does a very good job with Space Museum.
No, he really does. And in particular, some of the lighting that he uses, especially in that scene where, the doctor's sitting in that chair during the interrogation in episode 2. Obviously the chair is lit, and that could, when you do something like that, it can get screwy in the lens all kinds of ways. But I just like how it's lighting his face, and it makes him look sinister, but yet he's totally having a ball in that scene, screwing with the governor, I do think there is a lens flare somewhere. I think it's in episode 1.
Yes,
something catches,
there is.
But I'm like that. It doesn't. It's not terribly egregious. There's worse ones in the first Doctor's era, but I really like some of the stuff he does. Quite a bit. And there was some visual effects there too that had to be done with obviously the translucent nature of the TARDIS and that apparatus that Vicky puts her hand through, all that kind of stuff.
It's episode 2 when Ian realizes that the button has gone missing on his coat. I thought as a kid that I thought that lens flare was Ian's button magically disappearing through some wibbly wobbly temporal jiggery pokery.
Yeah.
Speaking of Ian, this is the first William Russell story that I've done since William Russell passed away a couple weeks ago. I did my eulogy for him 2 weeks ago. Give us your William Russell eulogy. I'm sure you have one ready to go. Even if you didn't tile his kitchen.
Well, no, but listen. No, I thought he was brilliant. Obviously, he was hired to be sort of the action man for the older Doctor. And boy, again, that's another well-directed fight, actually, in Doctor Who. And I think it's one of the best scenes in this, for a fight scene in Doctor Who. I think it's one of the best ones in that era, and I think it's one of the best scenes in this particular story. And he's taken on literally 3 dudes at one point. It's awesome. So he's always been one of my favorite characters for a number of reasons. I like the fact that he's a teacher, and he was there for that, and that was part of the remit, obviously, in the early era of the show. But he always handled stuff with a lot of dignity, and I think for the most part, we texted, when he died. I think he only falls down in one episode, and one story, and I think that's Edge of Destruction. I'm like, when I see that now, I'm like, what the hell is he thinking with these acting choices? Trying to be possessed, I guess. He just didn't know how to do that very well. But other than that, I mean, there's very little to complain about in any of his performances. And obviously, it's hard to think of Ian without Barbara, and the two of them are legendary together. And but at the same time, if one of those actors was not as good as the other, that wouldn't work. And it obviously did. And I think they fed off each other a lot, and I think they worked amazingly together. And that, in a lot of ways, was the core of those early episodes. And I enjoy watching them because of them a lot of times.
When I get the Blu-ray collections, my favorite part of the Blu-ray collections is not so much the episodes or the text commentary, often done by our friend Paul Scoons, or the behind the sofa stuff, or the new documentaries. I go right to the BD-ROM, and I read the production file for each episode. The production file for Dalek Invasion of Earth is one of the best production files out there. And they also have the camera scripts, and you can see the actual scripted speech for Hartnell to say goodbye to Susan at the end of that story, Dalek Invasion of Earth. It's not word for word how Hartnell delivered it. What Hartnell delivered was his memory of those printed lines, and his delivery is found poetry, and it's actually better than the words on the page. On the Trap 1 episode for the Season 2 Blu-ray collection, our friend Cy Hart, mainstay of this show, actually reads out from the script the Hartnell speech as he would have given it. But more to the point, I'm not going to talk about Space Museum because I foolishly realized that I forgot to read the Space Museum production file right before this recording, so I don't have any nuggets of goodness. But in the production file for Dalek Invasion of Earth, there is a memo where Verity Lambert says we're getting rid of Carol Ann Ford, because that was the last story of production block 1. It was the last story made for season 1, even though it was held over to air in season 2. But they also, in the same memo, she talks about getting rid of Jacqueline Hill at the same time. Can you imagine if they had gotten rid of Jacqueline Hill half a year earlier than she actually left the show? It's unthinkable that they didn't realize that she was one of their top assets, and they're talking casually about letting her go as if she does, she's just old furniture, when she was still one of the best things about that show right up until the chase, her very last story.
Absolutely. That's just nutty. Wow. I didn't know that.
And also scolding the cast for leaving early on Thursdays, which was like, it was not meant to be a half day. They were getting paid for the full day, but it was turning into a half day. They would leave after rehearsals, and she's scolding them in the memo for not sticking around for the full 8 hours or whatever it was they were contractually obligated to be there for. The production files are just great stuff. All this, all these memos from 60 years ago with a white hot rage.
I really need to look into those more. I really need to dig in.
Speaking of Blu-rays, I just finished Celestial Toymaker, the color animation on Blu-ray, and I'll be on the Trap One episode for that, which records in about 10 days. Have you seen the animation for Celestial Toymaker?
No, but I've seen reactions. It seems to be pretty split, actually.
I love it. I mean, I am a purist, right? Because I like the Hartnell era. I love the Hartnell era, and I like the way the stories were directed. The animations don't use the camera scripts. They're not reenacting what was lost. And sometimes the production notes, like the Galaxy 4 animation, the production notes say this is what the shot was, and it's not the shot that you're seeing. The shots that we would have had on the camera scripts are better than the shots that are rendered in animation. But for Celestial Toymaker, the stuff they're doing is superior to the direction that we got, and we can see that because we have the surviving episode 4. Because it's motion capture, they're not bound to the physical shape of Carmen Silvera or Campbell Singer. They use non-humanoid shapes for the characters that these actors played in episodes 1, 2, and 3. And the Blind Man's Bluff, rather than taking place on a flat studio floor, actually they take flat studio floor. Try saying that 5 times fast. I can't even say it once. But instead of it on a flat studio floor, the Blind Man's Bluff game is played almost in 4-dimensional space, and it's wild. And then the dancing floor sequence is also very trippy. I think you would actually enjoy it, even though you and I are both curmudgeonly purists. I think you would really enjoy the Celestial Toymaker animation.
Yeah, it's hard. I guess the question would be, though, I mean, I know that, look, you, as a producer, especially a producer of these particular DVDs, the animated lost stories, you gotta sell. You gotta produce a product that will sell and you believe will sell. And so, yeah, you take some artistic liberties with the way it was. I'm more of, like I said, I'm looking at the show more academically now. I know the story, of course. I've heard audios of it a couple times. And, I've seen, reconstructions. I just want to see how they did it. And that's how I'm more interested. Because, you look at Doctor Who itself, and, it started in 1963. And went all the way to 89 in its first incarnation. And it's an actual evolution of studio television production. I mean, the way that medium evolved, that's a document. And those early DVDs and some of the greatest stuff they do when they do behind the scenes stuff, and when they show that, I'm all for it. Maybe not, maybe just because I'm a nerd for the show, or maybe because I'm a television professional as well, maybe both. But the question I guess would be is like, why is it any different than my imagination? Why, if I'm listening to the audio of it and I already know what these characters look like from other media, some stills I've seen or whatever, I guess for people new to the story, yeah, the animation is great. It's awesome. And probably should exist for that reason. But for fans like me, like you say, a curmudgeonly old, purist, I'd rather still see, a loose cannon reconstruction, I think.
2 points about Celestial Toymaker, and then we'll go back to the Space Museum.
We probably should.
One. Point number one, this week, and we're recording this about 10 days before the episode goes out, so 2 weeks ago, as you're sitting there listening to me on your earphones, my beloved audience, Terry Nation Army, the YouTube channel, Dalek6388, did an hour-long video on the original camera scripts, which we still have for Toymaker, and reconstructing which parts of the script were written by which person. Brian Hales, Donald Tosh, John Wiles, Jerry Davis. Donald Tosh, over the years, told a lot of comical stories about how everything good about Celestial Toymaker is on him, and everything bad about Celestial Toymaker is on everybody else. He told the story that Brian Hales barely wrote anything for Celestial Toymaker because the idea terrified him and was driving him insane. Turns out that is completely untrue, and the video is very charitable by calling it a lie, or at least being a fabulist. You can actually see, because they didn't throw out pages, and they would just take the same page, white it out, and write over it. You could see the characters George and Margaret, where their names appeared in the script and were whited out, and where Dodo was typed over it with some weird spaces between Dodo and the colon, because Margaret has a lot more letters. Not only that, Dodo was scripted to be Anne Chaplet. The original companion was going to be Anne Chaplet, the 16th century serving girl. And that's why she's so naive, and that is why she keeps trying to give the game away to the opponents, because she was a sheltered 16th century teenager who didn't know any better. And we make fun of Dodo, but the only reason Dodo is that stupid in the story is because Dodo was supposed to be Anne. And that's why the character is named Dodo. They needed a 4-letter name, because if they went over 4 letters, then it would ruin the script, and they'd have to be typing over the dialogue. It's a great video. I'm not doing it. I can see from your glazed over eyes I'm not doing it justice. But that's definitely a video worth watching.
Well, first of all, it's hard to do that channel justice, because they are an amazing channel. I love that channel. That's a great YouTube channel. It's one of the best Doctor Who channels out there, if not the best, especially, for production nerds like myself. Absolutely. So yeah, I will watch. I had not seen that. It's been a couple months since I've watched anything from them, so I got to check that out, because that sounds awesome.
It took me 2 nights to get through the hour, but it is absolutely worth every second of it. And plus a lot more about who are George and Margaret, and why were they even being parodied in Doctor Who in the first place before of course they lost the rights to those 2 names. The other point about Celestial Toymaker has to do with Space Museum, because one of the new features they're going to be doing on the Blu-ray collections is the Escape Room Challenge. So there's a Doctor Who themed escape room built in a studio somewhere, I guess in London. And they have a team representing each of the classic Doctors. So on the Celestial Toymaker DVD, there's an 80-minute, very well-produced featurette of Peter Purves, Maureen O'Brien, and Lisa Bowerman, because there aren't too many other folks left from the Hartnell era to do it. The 3 of them are in a Hartnell-themed escape room, and they have to solve clues based on episodes that many of them either don't remember or have never seen. And there's a lot of props throughout. They have like the 5 Doctors Death Zone table with the models. They have the Trilogic game, all sorts of great stuff. I think it goes on a little bit too long, but it's 80 minutes of Peter Purves, Maureen O'Brien, and Lisa Bowerman trying to solve various escape room puzzles. And Maureen O'Brien is amazing. And everything she does on the DVDs and the animations that she's been a part of, Galaxy 4, Celestial Toymaker, even though she's not on that episode, she does appear heavily on the bonus features. Maureen O'Brien is great. I love her a lot more now that I'm watching this series, as a grown man, that I didn't appreciate when I was watching this as a teenager, and I thought she wasn't a great actress. I was completely 1,000% wrong on that.
Oh yeah, jeez. Anything
I said about her negatively on Records Doctor Who in 1993, I fully rescind and retract. She is a ball of fire in this story, and she, a teenage girl, foments a revolution along with the, Jeremy Bulloch and the other characters with the bushy eyebrows.
No, they gave her a lot of agency in this for a lot of reasons. I mean, she even knows. Even the Doctor gives her credit on screen for knowing a little bit about the 4th dimension.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely, this is a great episode for her. I mean, she's basically the reason why things succeed in this, because the doctor, as we know, was being well, they mentioned it. What do they call it? They called it not mummified. They actually used the term well, it's like, what the heck? What term they use? They didn't use, cryogenics is what they used in the book. They actually updated it.
Right after Pyramids of Mars, yes.
Yeah, but they actually said they didn't use embalmed. They said embalmed.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, when it's more really a cryonics sort of operation because they freeze him. But whatever the case, yeah, she did an amazing job, and I like it. When they give some of the companions, other than the doctor, of course, anyone other than the doctor, a little bit of agency to really solve the mystery at hand. And the thing that spurns the whole mystery, of course, is that little piece of the TARDIS that got stuck, which we really don't even see how it just unstuck itself. But at that point, who cares? I mean, that was the whole genesis of the story, the whole reason why it was launched.
It was the same with Edge of Destruction. Edge of Destruction is because a spring gets stuck in the TARDIS console.
Yep.
So Space Museum is a similar.
Yep.
So we've talked about Ian and Barbara, talked about Hartnell, talked about Vicky. Again, the script that Glyn Jones submitted was much more funny and more satirical, and a lot of that was removed in production. And I think that's the reason why fans of a certain age were very critical of the story, because they didn't know what the story was supposed to be. They thought the Morlocks were stupid bad guys, not realizing the Morlocks were stupid bad guys on purpose. It's a satire on England's administration of their former colonies as the empire is crumbling apart and disintegrating. And when the Morlock security guard yawns at the camera, that's not a blooper. That's scripted. He's meant to be yawning.
Yeah, and I think the only hint we get of it was when, the middle management guy is, outside of the TARDIS complaining to his buddies that he gets blamed for everything. By the governor, by Lobos, basically puts everything on him, and that is the only real, humor we have of the weight of the bureaucracy that is now on Xeros with the Morlocks.
So, of course, I'll be covering the novelization and the audio essay after the break, but when is the first time you read the novelization?
About 5 days ago.
So you didn't buy this in the wild in 1987 as you're
no, I did.
looking around Boston Commons.
I totally did. I bought every single one back in the 80s. I just never read them. I read very few of them, in fact. But I brought them to college with me for some reason because I liked the way they looked on my desk, I guess. But no, I love a lot of the stuff that Jones does with the novelization. He gives a lot more character to, he adds a bunch of characters for really no reason. I don't like that he does that, but then, he really gives us a peek into the minds of the thought process, especially Lobos, and then we get a sense of his frustration, although he adds all the stuff about him learning chess. He adds this, there's robots that assist them apparently.
Right.
Yeah, that's a whole nother line of because he's got this one assistant he calls Matt, of course, and he really values him because he helps teach him chess and he helps. I'm like, where's this going? He helps him strategize, and then he shoots him in anger and destroys Matt. and then he go. I guess it's kind of paid off when he decides to say when he says, "Oh man, now we got this uprising. I could sure use Matt to help me figure out how to overthrow the uprising."
For me, it was the phrase "red letter day." I would have been 13 when the book came out in paperback, and I bought it very close in time to its original release date, as opposed to Faceless Ones, which is the next book out. I saw that on the shelf, so I deliberately didn't buy it, and then didn't buy it again for 2 or 3 years. But Space Museum I read very close to its paperback release date. I had never heard the expression red letter day before. That was like a blind spot in my childhood. I learned that expression from this book. And Lobos makes a big deal on what is a red letter day. He doesn't even know what it means, but he's using the expression.
Well, he does that for a couple of, these Earth expressions. He's like, where did I pick this up? I mean, I almost think that, because Red Letter Day was in the televised version. They use that in the televised version.
Right.
And so I'm thinking he's almost like trying to add to the character and almost apologizing for a script for being too colloquial, as far as, modern day 1965 was or whatever, rather than Far Out Space Nuts,
Now you have just hit me in my soft underbelly. Far Out Space. I have used the theme song to Far Out Space Nuts in an earlier episode of this program. There is not a day that goes by where I don't have that theme in my head. Bob Denver, Chuck McCann. Saturday morning. I said lunch, not launch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sid and Marty Krofft gold. Sid and Marty Krofft were the Saturday morning live action sci-fi guys. You know this already, but my audience in the UK might not.
Okay.
Every year, Sid and Marty had a different series about Earth people caught up in some alien situation. H.R. Puffin stuff. Lidsville, which is a teenage boy stuck in a land of living hats with Charles Nelson Riley as the evil wizard.
I'll be right back.
Well, Barsky has stepped away, and since I'm not going to be doing any post-production on this interview, Barsky, I am sure, is going somewhere into his incredible library and getting us some Sid and Marty Krofft goodness. So I'll tell you, the audience, here comes Barsky.
Did you not see this on my bookshelf when you were here?
I would need to spend 3 weeks. Oh, it's Sigmund the Sea Monster.
I have had this for decades. He's got his little like plastic lobster he holds. It's awesome.
That was the first new Sid and Marty series that aired while I was alive, because Puffin stuff goes back to the late 60s. My father would sit there on Saturday morning feeding me a bottle while watching Sigmund and the Sea Monsters on TV. It was my very first sci-fi program, even though I didn't know it yet.
Yeah, I absolutely love that show. Probably my favorite back in the day.
Far Out Space Nuts is a comedy. Bob Denver and Chuck McCann are NASA maintenance men who are loading up a Saturn rocket with food supplies. So one of them is sitting in a chair eating, and the other one is loading up. Breakfast. Chuck McCann hits the breakfast button. Breakfast hatch opens. Bob Denver puts in the breakfast foods. Bob Denver, you'll know better from Gilligan's Island. Bob Denver goes lunch, and instead of hitting the lunch button, Chuck McCann hits the launch button, and the rocket blasts off, and now they're in outer space, and every week they land on another planet and run into some wacky alien monsters, one of whom in the opening credits suspiciously resembles Chewbacca before Star Wars was even made.
Hey, no, wait a minute. I think you got it backwards. Didn't Chuck McCann say lunch and Bob Denver hit launch instead?
And it's Chuck McCann's incredible voice going, I said lunch, not launch.
Not launch, yeah, exactly. Yes. I got to tell you just one more brief thing. It's stupid, I was visiting a friend of mine. He lived at his mom's house, and she was actually another very famous actress. And we went walking down the street. No, when I was driving up to see him, I saw Chuck McCann walking his dog outside, and it took me everything not to yell out the window of the car. I said launch. I said lunch, not launch.
I'm sure that is not what he wants. He lived to be in his 90s. He had an incredible set of credits. I don't think he wanted to be remembered just for Far Out Space Nuts, but everyone has that one role.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I saw I look forward to seeing that on Saturday mornings.
Like Bob Denver is always going to have Dobie Gillis and Gilligan's Island. If you're Bob Denver, Far Out Space Nuts is an asterisk. Chuck McCann, for whatever reason, at least in my sphere, is best remembered for Far Out Space Nuts, even though it was only a year out of his life.
Yep.
His incredibly prolific life. So,
poor bastard.
You're talking about Far Out Space Nuts to provoke me, and you certainly succeeded. Hi. But the point is, this is a thing on Hartnell Who. Everybody is speaking English. And this is before we have the mythology about the TARDIS translating everything into English. Mm-hmm. These space aliens from the far future are using very specific Earth idioms. So, for example, I think it was Ganatus and the Daleks goes, we won't use one of your Earth expressions, ladies first, which Athal could not possibly know.
Yeah.
Living as the 10th generation in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, having never left the planet. Glyn Jones leans into that in the novelization. He realizes that an alien governor in another galaxy would not know a very specific Earth expression like red letter day, so spends half a page wondering where he got the expression from. Whereas on TV, it's just tossed off casually as if he knows what it is.
Yeah, and he adds a few in there too, like put a horse out to pasture, old warhouse at the pasture. I think that I don't think was in the televised version, but that's in the book. Maybe there could be something. Look, he knows the Earth game of chess, right? He's been learning that, so he could pick up. I think within the context of the books, but he could very well have picked it up if he's learning things like chess, and he's got robots who knows what these robots know. But at the same time, in the context of the TV show, they're collecting spaceships, and I think it's unclear whether the spaceships are supposed to be only from the Moroc's history or from all around, because they kind of theorize that. The Doctor at least theorizes that when they first land. But maybe he might have learned that from space crew that he put on display. That might have been from Earth passing by. Who knows?
Indeed. So we're pretty much at the end of the hour that I have allotted for this. I don't think.
Oh my God, we didn't even talk about the book, really, man.
That's what my audio essay is for. We don't think of Space Museum as a top 3 or a top 5 or possibly even a top 10 Hartnell. The Hartnell era, every month, it's a completely different kind of story. You can go from the Crusade to the Space Museum to the Chase to the Time of the Galaxy for 5 very different serials, very different tones. I think we are lucky to have this story. It is trying to make a point about the banality of evil empires. It is doing this very clever, timey-wimey stuff before Stephen Moffat has coined the expression. And episode 2 is titled The Dimensions of Time, which is a nice rhyme for Dimensions in Time, which comes about 30 years later, and which was charmingly novelized by your co-producer, Jim Sangster. I think Space Museum works very well, and if it's not one of Doctor Who's best stories ever, that's not the fault of Space Museum. It's just the fault of everything else being even better. This is a very good story on its own right.
Yeah, I agree. If it's followed by the Chase, preceded by the Crusade. A lot of people don't like the Chase either, but you know what? Again, it's a kid show, and I like the chess. I'm sorry, I think it's a lot of fun, and I want to have fun when I'm watching Doctor Who. And I like what Glenn Jones does with this novel. He adds maybe too many weird characters, especially at the end. Although I think some of them serve their purpose. But at the same time, I think what he does really enhances what I saw on the show. He gives a deeper. He really gives great character to the Doctor as well, with some of the references the Doctor's throwing in the novel about, Augustus Caesar and Lao Tzu and all that kind of stuff and interestingly enough, the one that he does reference in the show, he throws out in the book, the James Watts reference.
That's right.
It's not in the book. So that's very strange, but he gives him so many more between, Augustus Caesar and Shakespeare and everybody else.
I will break down in the audio essay more specific script to book changes. So I will give you preemptive credit, even though I have not written or recorded the audio essay yet. But I will say that you haven't been on the show in a while. You are going to be back in less than 2 months talking about a Patrick Troughton story, and I will not say for the audience which one, but we're going to be hearing your dulcet tones again very soon on this show. Next time, Mr. Barsky, thank you so much for all you do for this show. You were the hardest working executive producer in podcasting.
Yeah, I just hope I do better on the Troughton quiz than I did on the first Doctor quiz today.
You should do a Troughton rewatch top to bottom before the next time we record, and that's always a good idea.
Oh, well, look, I'm not against it, but man, it's the time. I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling next month, so I don't know if I'm going to have the time.
Barsky, I'll see you very soon. Thanks again, my friend.
Thank you. It's been great as usual.
Where is the world that they used to know, and how will they ever return? Now they got a home where strangest creatures roam, and monsters better help them along. So step right up and take a look at the stars. You're leaving the world behind. Oh, step right up, you won't believe your eyes at what those far
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space. In a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts,
Eric Gulbranson,
Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
Explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse. On shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point Network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast.
Doctor Who, The Space Museum, by Glyn Jones, broadcast as The Space Museum, teleplay by Glyn Jones, televised in April and May 1965, paperback release date June 18, 1987, target book number 117, cover artist Tony Mazzaro. The TARDIS materializes on what at first sight appears to be a dry and lifeless planet, serving only as a graveyard for spaceships. Then, the TARDIS crew discovers a magnificent museum housing relics from every corner of the galaxy. These have been assembled by the Morlocks, a race of cruel conquerors who have invaded the planet Zaros and enslaved its inhabitants. Upon further exploration, the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Vicky seem to stumble upon the impossible, for suddenly facing them, in an exhibit case they find themselves. I've been in an Elvis Costello mood lately. In 1987 and 1988, Costello and Paul McCartney worked together on material that became two albums released a year later, Costello's Spike and McCartney's Flowers in the Dirt. You can hear each man's voice, both lyrically and literally, on each album, and on YouTube you can find demos of each performing songs that would wind up on the other's album. These demos are fascinating, as you can hear song origins in studio, no longer evident on the album, or roads not taken, which result, sometimes, in demos far better than the songs that got released. I'm going to be careful with copyright here, but I assume it's okay to play small snippets from demos, under fair use or for critical purposes. So here is Costello and McCartney playing, 30 years after the fact, the famous riff from Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue. Presumably they started off just tooling around with one of the all-time great early rock songs, and seeing where it goes.
Is it all in that pretty little head of yours? What goes on in that place in the dark? Well, I used to know a girl and I could have sworn that her name was Veronica.
This song eventually becomes Veronica, a top 20 hit for Costello, I think his highest charting American release, and a song that crushed me when it came out, for reasons we'll probably get to in the episode covering the August 1987 Target release. The song is about Costello's grandmother and her battle with Alzheimer's disease, but McCartney contributed the bridge and elements of the chorus. The final version no longer begins with the Peggy Sue riff, but once you hear the album cut, you cannot unhear Buddy Holly in the final riff's structure. While Costello got a top 20 single out of the collaboration, McCartney also got a top 20 single, though for the latter you'd have to assume that was a disappointment. My Brave Face was the first and best-selling single off Flowers in the Dirt, which my mother, an original Beatles fan from the 60s, enjoyed, as it had several Beatles-sounding tracks. Costello being from Liverpool and growing up a fan is very evident. But McCartney's version of the song, the album cut, is a standard mid-tempo pop hit. The sheet music that I could find online calls it, quote, moderately fast, but here's how it sounded in studio, this time with Costello on lead vocals and McCartney on keyboard.
1, 2, 3, 4. Where I can find my brave face. I've been doing the rounds. Monica, some days I do what you like.
McCartney, by the way, spends much of this video mugging at the camera while playing the keyboard exaggeratedly fast. Costello sits immobile behind the mic, strumming on his acoustic guitar. Now that version is a banger, much better to my ear than the album cut, more raw and aggressive, as befitting a breakup song. One more Costello anecdote before we get to the book of the week. In 1977, Costello and the Attractions were tapped at the last minute to appear on Saturday Night Live, NBC's long-running 90-minute sketch comedy and political satire and music variety show, at that point in its third season, and now coming up on 50 years old and still going strong. The Sex Pistols were booked to appear, but Malcolm McLaren couldn't get a visa to the U.S. for, well, many different reasons have been suggested over the years. The Attractions were already in New York and got the SNL gig, subbing out for the Sex Pistols, after the Ramones refused first, saying, quote, "We don't substitute for nobody." NBC and the record label told Costello to perform Less Than Zero, a song about British fascism that wasn't going to resonate with an American audience, and a few seconds into the number, Costello famously shouts "Stop" to the band and says to the studio audience,
"I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason to do this song here."
The band then plays Radio Radio instead, which had not been released in the US and had not been cleared by the network, and live shows have to time their segments to the second, and the sudden change of number messed with the timing, and Costello was banned from SNL for another 12 years, until returning to perform Veronica, of all songs, in '89, and then he returned in '99 with the Beastie Boys as his backup band, shouting "Stop" 16 bars into Sabotage, and again playing Radio Radio instead, this time with network approval. By the way, watching Ad Rock and Mike D and MCA play backup for Costello is awesome. Those are my people. The relevance of this, 2 points. First, Space Museum, the novelization, I am reading 1 week after Terrence Dix's masterclass in trying to make the Faceless Ones readable. And after a couple of pages of Glyn Jones' prose, I wanted to shout at this book, "Stop!" and then say to you, the audience, "I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason to read this book here," and then just play the Faceless Ones episode again as an encore. Here's the first couple of paragraphs of the Space Museum, page 7. 3 pairs of eyes gazed at the scanner screen, eyes like those of a sad and lonely person in a strange town desperately seeking the smile of a friendly face. The 4th pair of eyes gave no hint of emotion. The doctor was totally absorbed, totally fascinated. Vicky sighed, a sigh so audible that Ian could not resist a sidelong glance at his young companion. He turned back to the screen and, knowing exactly how she felt, almost mechanically placed a comforting arm across her shoulders. She didn't seem to notice. Barbara sighed, perhaps not quite so audibly, but with gentlemanly impartiality. Ian's other arm reached out to comfort her. All he could see on the screen was sand, 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 and more sand. Yeah. So, we're not going to be doing a page-by-page breakdown of the prose. Not here. Not tonight. Although I will say on page 17, Ian appears to be quoting Douglas Adams' script for The Pirate Planet, as Ian thinks, quote, maybe his biorhythms were at rock bottom. The Doctor uses a dated Americanism on page 36, which the author speculates is because he's standing under a spaceship named the Robert E. Lee, which, as a Yankee, I really hope is never the name of an American spacecraft. My second point is we now have access to the Space Museum demo tapes. Received fan wisdom on this story is that Jones submitted a script with a lot of satirical humor, which script editor Dennis Spooner took out, and which Jones reinstated for the novelization. We now have access to 4 versions of Space Museum. The novelization, the rawest expression of what Glyn Jones wanted to say 21 years earlier. Versions 2 and 3, courtesy of the Season 2 Collection Blu-ray, are the rehearsal script and camera script. My assumption is that Jones wrote the former, and Spooner, likely with director Mervyn Pinfield, wrote the latter. Perhaps Jones had both of these in front of him as he wrote the novelization. If there are earlier surviving drafts of Space Museum, like a story breakdown, or a script that predates the rehearsal scripts, those are not included on the Blu-rays. And then the 4th version is what, of course, actually aired on TV. When I say rehearsal, I mean rehearsal script. When I say camera, I mean camera script. When I say TV, I mean the TV episodes as broadcast. And when I say a chapter or a page number, I of course refer to the book. The camera contains a lot of whited out material. Rehearsal lines dropped by the time Mervyn Pinfield was ready to go into the studio. Most of the Doctor's lines are the ones cut, whited out, partially typed over. A sequence in Chapter 2, where the TARDIS crew sees the Morlocks massacring a group of Xeron rebels, has no equivalent in either rehearsal or camera. This is meant to be a window on the future. What will happen to Jeremy Bulloch's and Peter Craze's characters, and the rest of our rebels, if Vicky is not there to teach them how to properly rebel? It's an important point, but nowhere to be found in the other three versions. Chapter 3 introduces Governor Lobos before the Episode 1 cliffhanger. He doesn't show up until Episode 2 on TV. There's a lot of material of the 4 TARDIS crew members snarking at one another. This material does appear in rehearsal, like the Doctor observing that Vicky's school was more advanced than the one Ian and Barbara taught at, and the snarkiest lines are whited out of the camera, at the order of, if not physically whited out by, Spooner. Pages 39 and 40 of the camera are merged into one, physically copied and pasted together, and the Episode 1 cliffhanger reveal also benefits in the camera from more rapid intercutting. In the book, Ian and Vicky become visible to the Morlock guards before the TARDIS arrives, but only if they enter certain rooms in the museum. But as with the early Xeron massacre, none of that's in the rehearsal, even to be whited out or physically chopped out like that snarky dialogue. Episode 2 rehearsal gives a page and a half of stage directions talking about how the Morlocks went from a conquesting Roman civilization to being soft and practically forgotten. Exactly all of those stage directions are chopped out of the camera script. Some of Daco's lines on TV go to a book-only character called Bo, B-O, who's not present in rehearsal or camera. Jones writes a scene in the book where Ian and Vicky literally sleep through the moment when the time track catches up with the TARDIS, which thankfully you won't find in either script or on TV. Jones in the book foists a ton of silly space names on the Morlocks, a subordinate named Ogrek, a god named Ork, similar to the American sitcom Mork and Mindy, where a young Robin Williams played Mork from Ork, and animals called Flebets and Gambos. There are unseen Xerons named Olem and Sang. I don't know about you, but for me, silly space names, TM, are not a mark of great writing. Olem and Sang are named in rehearsal, but Spooner likely rewrote that scene for the camera, as evidenced by page number 10A. The added pages had to be given weird numbers like that so as not to impact the rest of the script, and that was the end of Olem's and Sang's chances to have Jeremy Bulloch say their names on TV. A silly line of the Doctor about a museum not being the place to shape the future is in both the book and rehearsal, but has been typed over in the camera script and replaced with better verbiage, though in the event even the edited camera line isn't spoken on TV at all. William Hartnell can only remember so much, a point we'll come back to later on. Chapter 3 includes a lot more dialogue-based humor, the Morlock governor having a battle of wills with a robot that he calls Matt, which I suppose is the Morlock version of a silly space name. And the Doctor and companions trade inane chatter about microbes in mastodon stomachs, the walls of Jericho, King Kong, and the hordes of Genghis Khan. Some of this is in the rehearsal, but all deleted for the camera, as we have another 2 pages cut and pasted down into one, 24 and 25. The book includes comedy in the form of museum exhibits that loudly explain themselves to you if you get close enough, but that is not in either version of the script, which saves an extra cast member for the budget. The Doctor's interrogation by Lobos at the end of Episode 2 is, as I said to Barsky earlier, one of 2 very funny sequences in the episode. Jones adds a lot of book detail to the interview, which is not present in the rehearsal, but the rehearsal scene is left fully intact for the camera, so we can assume Spooner enjoyed it. In the book, the Doctor also quotes from The Tempest, Act 2, Scene 2, and references Galen, Spartacus, and the Tainted American game show the $64,000 question. Sadly, the rehearsal for Episode 2 is missing the last few pages on the Blu-ray, but assuming the camera didn't delete anything significant, the cliffhanger as seen on TV is basically kept as is from Glyn Jones' brain, adding only a photo caption of the Doctor realizing what fate the Morlocks have in store for him, which is not on the book. There's a Dennis Spooner scene added in Episode 3, page 5A of the Episode 3 camera, giving Ivor Salter, in the unnamed role of Morlock Commander, a juicy scene. He'll get a lot more of those next season when he comes back in the Mythmakers. His character laments his posting on Zeros, and dialogue written by Spooner, leading into the Jones pen scene where he berates a subordinate for not carrying out an order that he'd never given in the first place. Jones adds for the book a new Morlock character, a mercenary for hire named Mort from the planet Cream, Kreme, yes, which nowadays reads like an allusion to the American donut chain Krispy Kreme. Spooner also adds some Ian and Barbara and Vicky dialogue, more discussion of what moves the TARDIS crew can and cannot make to wind up in the museum exhibit cases, dialogue you will not find in either the book or the rehearsal.
Don't you fire that thing.
Well, wouldn't that change the shape of things to come?
Well, it would for you. You'd be dead.
They can't kill us. We're going to end up in those cases.
Not necessarily. Oh, you can change the future so that we don't end up in those cases. But if we're all dead, what's the point?
That means we can't fight against anybody. We don't know what we're doing.
We've just lost the doctor. Has that already changed the future? We don't know, Vicky. Maybe that's the way it happened. We've no reason to suppose that we all ended up in the cases at exactly the same time. So we could be doing exactly what we're supposed to do.
I've had enough of this. Now listen, we're going to deal with him. And then we're going after the doctor whether we're supposed to or not.
That is a well-written scene by Spooner, by the way, but it is kind of unlikely because a Morlock guard is standing just off camera holding a gun on them the whole time, and is very generous to allow them a full 60 seconds of expository dialogue before finally remembering who exactly is supposed to be in charge of these prisoners. Episode 3 has other scenes likely written by Spooner, like pages 17, 17A, and 17B, introducing Vicky to the Xeron rebels, which doesn't happen in the rehearsal. Jones does include a version of pages 17, 17A, and 17B in the book, but now it's Vicky dining with the rebels, without having a separate meeting scene with them first, eating 3 days worth of their food, and instantly developing a crush on Daco. That's pages 86 to 89. The humor is in Jones having fun, describing Lobos's increasing outrage at his guard's failure to capture the rebels, with humor about his increasing heartburn, and destroying Matt the robot as the latter seeks him out to prefer a nice game of chess on page 93, end of chapter 4. This humor, if that's what it is, isn't in the rehearsals. So when collective fan wisdom has Spooner chopping out a lot of humor, he apparently didn't chop out as much as you might think. The book reinstates some rehearsal material that didn't make it to camera, but also adds a lot that was never in rehearsal in the first place. Let's do our deepest dive into Chapter 5, called Rescue. On page 95, when Daco comes to rescue Barbara, she recognizes him as having engaged in feudal heroics in that alternate time track in the Episode 1 material. Pages 96 to 100, meanwhile, have a very serious scene where Vicky tries to goad the Xerons into revolution, and including a new Xeron named Gyar, G-Y-A-R, who's not in any of the other versions. This scene, by the way, is almost entirely present in both rehearsal and camera, minus Gyar and maybe a few stray words. But there's no comedy here, and Spooner didn't change a thing, except to misspell the word planet when Jones had it spelled correctly. Meanwhile, pages 100 to 102 are a comedy scene. Ian's captured guard, Peter Diamond, Ian's old friend from the Romans, which is coming up soon on this show, and Ivor Salter. Jones mocks Salter's character's thought processes in the prose, and there's more dialogue in the book, but not in the rehearsal. And again, the camera captures the rehearsal pretty faithfully. Pages 103 to 111 have a very long scene, mostly original to the book, of the Xerons smuggling Vicky to the armory through secret dark tunnels, of which Vicky is very afraid. We learn something of past Xeron history, of wars and secret hiding places, then Vicky references the Valley of the Pharaohs, to which the Xerons go, "Huh?" None of that is in either script. The camera features Spooner rewriting the armory scene, adding pages 38 and 38A to replace Jones's more sparse original take. The book has Vicky out with the computer instead of reprogramming, which is interesting because reprogramming it was Jones's original idea from the rehearsal. On page 111, we learn that Xerons don't have a sense of smell, another detail not present in either script. The Episode 3 cliffhanger does show Spooner deleting a lot of dialogue about whether or not Ian was bluffing, presumably cut for timing or pacing reasons. The cliffhanger moment should be the Doctor in danger, after all, not Ian, engaging in wordplay with a character named after the word lobotomy. The PA for episode 4 in the camera script is named Snowy White. Nothing to do with the book, but boy is that an interesting name. An early episode 4 scene on TV shows the Zerons passing out their weapons. In the book, pages 114 to 117, Jones invites another new character called Jens, Jens, a Zeron boy who wants to join the fight. Tor is put off by his aggression, for his is a peaceful race, and he turns Jens away. None of this is in either script. A good example of humor that Spooner took out or changed is the sequence early in episode 4 where Lobos revives the Doctor. The book and rehearsal script are almost entirely identical, but the camera scripts trim or rewrite a lot of dialogue, with pages 12 and 13 and 15 and 16 condensed into one, then with the Doctor's Jones dialogue about having composed poetry and written square roots being rewritten by Spooner. The book also includes comedy with Peter Diamond's guard, named Pluton, which is also present in both scripts, but the book gets into Pluton's POV, and actually has him faint as a comedy moment to end chapter 5. So the final chapter. In the book, Pluton, our timid Morok guard, shoots Gaiar and pretends to kill Dako, but is secretly on the rebel side, so doesn't really kill them. This is not on the camera script, which otherwise is very close to what's in the book, except there is no Gaiar on TV to be pretend killed, just Sita, who really does die for real. And the friendly Morok guard, Peter Diamond, is no longer there. In the book, the Doctor gets a longer version of his rehearsal script speech about the TARDIS crew's lives influencing the lives of others. Really, really long speech. Now, 3 guesses as to what William Hartnell could do with that speech in the last 10 minutes of a 75-minute recording block. In the camera, Spooner whites out a whole chunk of Doctor speech and replaces it, page 35, with "Quite so, my boy, quite so." By the way, Hartnell delivers that line as "Quite so, yes, quite so, my boy." So he actually remembered more than Spooner gave him credit for. The book ends up with a happy story arc for Pluton, who starts off supporting the rebels because he's afraid that Lobos is going to kill him for insubordination, but winds up with the rebels themselves. But again, if the rehearsal scripts were the draft that Spooner cut down for the broadcast version, Pluton isn't in them, not in terms of saving and then joining the Zerons. The book, of course, is also missing the final Dalek scene, which does appear in the rehearsal draft. The major difference in the camera script is that Spooner includes a much longer explanation about the time-space visualizer, which appears in the next televised story, The Chase, but does not appear in the next novelization because the Chase book is still a long way out in the life of this podcast. The Chase is another story where the Terry Nation scripts are a far cry from what Dennis Spooner delivered on screen, but I'll happily save that story for another day. Meanwhile, Elvis, play us out. Next time on Doctor Who Literature, week 2 of our 4-week series on the William Hartnell novelizations of 1987. Oh, and you're going to like this one. I am a very big fan of the next story. It is a fascinating tale about philosophical monsters who are afraid of the dark. It includes a lot of found poetry in the form of fluffed or forgotten dialogue that winds up being delivered on screen better than it ever would have sounded in the scripts if delivered as intended. I'll be joined by John Arnold from the Black Archive series and many other bits of Doctor Who nonfiction. Next week, we're going to discuss Doctor Who, The Sensorites, the first novelization written by Nigel Robinson. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer, and this week's guest, to whom special thanks are due, David Barsky. The podcast is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.